Good afternoon, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure. This is my first trip to Kazakhstan. What a beautiful city Astana is. Congratulations. It's a gorgeous city. I'm going to start this afternoon with an anecdote. I hope it'll be instructive to the conversation. When Chancellor Merkel became Chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first few weeks of her new government to help her address the question, how do we grow the German economy in the 21st century? Now remember, Germany is the most robust industrial economy per capita in the world. So when I got to Berlin, the very first question I asked the Chancellor, Madam Chancellor, how do you grow the German economy, the European Union economy, the global economy in the sunset of a great energy era? This is the problem facing Germany, Europe, Kazakhstan, China, America, and the world. The second industrial revolution is sunsetting in the next half century. Fossil fuel energies are becoming more expensive, more volatile in price on world markets. They're never going to get cheaper. And now the technologies based on those energies, like the internal combustion engine, centralized electrification, these technologies have exhausted their S-curve. There's very little productivity we can still get out of these old 20th century technologies. And now the entire infrastructure of this civilization made out of carbon is becoming too expensive. This whole civilization is made out of carbon. We grow our food in petrochemical fertilizers and pesticides. All of our construction materials are made out of petrochemicals. Most of our pharmaceutical products are still made out of petrochemicals. Our synthetic fiber is made out of petrochemicals. Our power, our transport, heat and light, this entire civilization has been built on the burial grounds of the Carboniferous age. We exhumed those carbon deposits. We built a great, short-lived civilization. But now we're in the end game. Let me give you two events that I think determine the framework for what this government and every government needs to do in this century. First event, July 2008. Oil hits $147 a barrel on world markets. And when that happened, all the prices across the supply chain went through the roof because everything's made out of carbon. And when those prices went through the roof, purchasing power shut down in July 2008. The entire economy stopped in that month when oil hit $147 a barrel. That was the economic earthquake. The collapse of the financial market 60 days later was the aftershock. Our world leaders are still dealing with the aftershock. We haven't gotten to the earthquake. What's becoming apparent in the business community, we now know we're in an end game. I chair a group of 120 global companies in my group. IT companies, electronic companies, utility and energy companies, construction companies. We know. When oil started to go over $100 a barrel in 2007, all the other prices creeped up. At 122 a barrel, we had food riots in 22 countries because the price of wheat, barley, rye, and rice were doubling, tripling, trebling because of the oil price. We had 1 billion people. We weren't sure how they were going to be fed. At $147 a barrel, we all stopped buying. The ports shut down. That was the earthquake. We're now in an end game. We know how far we can globalize the world based on these energies and these technologies. The zone is between 120 and 140 a barrel. Whenever you get into that zone, Prices go up, purchasing power shuts down. In 2009, oil prices went down to 30 a barrel because there was no economic activity in the world. It was flat. As soon as we started to reinvest in inventories in 2010, oil prices went up. And in the first quarter of 2012, we hit a new peak, a small peak, 123 a barrel. And when that happened, Unilever, Colgate-Palmolive, watch those companies, they're the major consumer companies, they said profits are down at 123 a barrel. We had to raise our prices because of the oil price in our products. And we're now in a second slowdown. What I'm saying to you here is that we are in 5, 6, 7-year cycles of growth, slowdown, growth, slowdown. It's an end game. It's dangerous, but it's also an opportunity. When China brought a third of the human race into the second industrial revolution at an 8, 9, 10, 11% growth rate, too much aggregate demand against the supply of oil reserves. That's what this is about. Oil prices go up, other prices go up, shut down. We've had 2 milestones. Peak oil per capita, 1979. Peak oil production, 2006. And we distributed all the oil reserves in 1979 to everyone alive at that point, and everyone shared it. That's the most oil per person we had available. We found more oil since then, but population rose a lot quicker. So if we distributed all the crude oil now to 7 billion people, there's less per person. Peak oil per capita, 1979. Peak oil production, that's a geological term. It's when half the oil is used up on the classic Hubert bell curve in geology. Our geologists have been arguing about peak oil for 30 years. 2011, the International Energy Agency put the discussion to a close. They issued their 2011 report. You probably read it. The International Energy Agency, we rely on them for our energy forecasting. They said it looks like we peaked. 2006 at 70 million barrels a day. We'll go down to around 69 million barrels, but listen to this. The IEA says it's going to cost $8 trillion to get the remaining oil out in the next 20 years. We have other fossil fuels. Tar sands in Canada, heavy oil in Venezuela, shale gas deposits in various countries. But these are more difficult fossil fuels. We're only moving there because of the price of oil. It's much more difficult to extract oil out of rocks and sand than it is getting oil out of an oil well in Saudi Arabia. We are endgaming the second industrial revolution. Does anyone in this room think the price of fossil fuels, that curve is going to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper? Anyone? This leads to the second issue of the last 5 years, Copenhagen. 2009 December, 192 heads of state come together to deal with the entropy bill for the industrial age. I assume we have some engineers here. You know you cannot escape that second law of thermodynamics. We're paying the entropy bill. We have spewed massive amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere to build this great industrial era. And now we simply have too much CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide on this atmosphere, and we can't get enough of the sun's heat off the planet. How bad is it? It's much worse than we're being told in public policy. The new UN Climate Panel report is just coming out now. It's the 6th report. And the news is very sober. If you're a parent or a grandparent in this room, I want you to listen to the next few minutes, if you have children and grandchildren. The 2007 report of the UN Climate Panel said that it looks like a 3°C rise in temperature in this century. Now that's looking very conservative. We've spewed so much more carbon in the last 5 years. But to put this in perspective for the parents and grandparents here, if we go up 3 degrees in this century, and that's looking wildly conservative now, it takes us back to the temperature on Earth 3 million years ago. in your children's generation, one generation. That was a different world. What's terrifying about climate change and not readily understood is it changes the water cycle of the earth. That's why it's so terrifying. We're the watery planet. When we go and explore other planets, we want to know, is there water on Mars? Is there water on Venus? Because no water, no life. Our ecosystems here on this planet have developed over millions of years based on certain water regimes. We call this the hydrological cycle. Now, parents and grandparents, for every 1 degree that the temperature goes up on this planet because of industrial climate change, for every 1 degree the temperature goes up, the atmosphere absorbs 7% more precipitation from the ground. The heat sucks up that precipitation into the atmosphere. Every 1 degree, 7% more precipitation in the atmosphere. This throws off the entire water cycle of the earth in one generation. That means we're seeing longer, more bitter winter snows. We're seeing more dramatic spring floods. We're experiencing more prolonged summer droughts, more Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes, more glacier melts, seawater rise. We are seeing a dramatic shift in the water cycle of this little earth in just a few decades. Our ecosystems cannot catch up to a dramatic shift in the water cycle. I don't have to tell you here in Kazakhstan how important water is. So what's happening is our ecosystems are destabilizing on every continent. And our scientists now tell us, in all the scientific studies, we are now in the 6th extinction event of life on Earth right now. We're in it in real time. We've had 5 extinction events on this planet in the last 450 million years. 5 wipeouts. And every time we had a mass extinction of life, the temperature of the planet shifted quickly. There was a turning point. Mass die-out. On the average, it took about 10 million years after each die-out to recover the biodiversity. 10 million years. Our scientific studies, all of them now show we are on the 6th extinction event. Now remember, we're the babies here. Anatomically modern human beings, we've only been here about 175,000 years. We are the youngest species. So it's hard for us to grasp 10 million years. So now, on our watch, we are in the 6th extinction event, and our scientific studies show that in this century, your kids, we could see the extinction of between 50 and 70% of all the forms of life on Earth. As my wife says, we're not addressing the enormity of this moment. We are asleep. Business as usual. There's no guarantee for our species. I'm sure I'm the oldest person in this room. I won't be here. Many of you will. But let me tell you something. 99.5% of all the species that have ever lived on this earth have come and gone. 99.5% of all the species have come and gone. Our odds are not so good here. This is hard to talk about. It overwhelms. We want to say this isn't happening. It's happening. So now we have a global economic crisis, and when we get oil into the range of 125 to 145 a barrel, all the prices go up and we shut down the economy. We've got huge amounts of the human race underemployed and unemployed. These old energies are getting more expensive, the technologies are old, and the whole system is on life support. I just came back from China where I met with the government leaders, the leadership in China for 2 weeks. And I said to them, do not be deceived by all these beautiful new cities. This is new old. New old. And when I see Astana, it's beautiful, but I'm telling you, this is new old. Meaning we're building the buildings, the developments, the technologies, the energies are all the 20th century. Residue, it is sunsetting. We're getting trapped in building new old, which is not going to get us to where we want to go. So what do? Global economic crisis, now a species crisis. We need a new economic plan for the world. We have to have an economic vision that's compelling for everybody. We need an economic plan for that vision that's deliverable. And this economic vision and plan has to move as quickly in the developing world in countries like Kazakhstan as it does in Germany. We, the human race, we have to be off carbon in 40 years. Not low, not clean, off. Across all of our sectors of the economy if we have any chance of addressing the enormity of this crisis facing our species. I know this is hard to hear in a country where you produce a lot of oil. But this is what we need to grasp. How do we make this transition over the next 50 years? So we need to step back and ask the question, how do the great economic revolutions occur in history? If we know how they occur, we can get a roadmap here with the leadership in this room, government and industry, on what Kazakhstan can do to lead Central Asia and the world into a new economic era of sustainable growth post-carbon. The great economic revolution in history occur when two phenomena merge: communication revolutions and energy regimes. All through history, the great economic paradigm shifts occur when we create new energy regimes. New energy regimes allow us to create more complex societies. That flow of energy allows us to bring more people together, differentiate labor skills, integrate people into larger social units. But the complexities of those new energies then require new communication revolutions that are agile enough to manage the new energy regimes. All through history, when communication revolutions converge and merge and manage energy revolutions, they really do change the economic paradigm. They change temporal spatial orientation. They even change human consciousness. I'll give you an example. 19th century, we had a very powerful convergence of communication energy, a first industrial revolution. We went from manual print presses to steam power printing in the 19th century. This was a big deal, like the internet today, because all of a sudden, going from manual printing to steam power printing, we could mass produce massive volumes of print material, very cheap, low transaction costs. But then we had to have a literate society that could actually take advantage of the new cheap print, so we introduced public schools. And we created a print literate workforce with the communication skills to manage a very complex, coal-powered, steam-driven, railroad-driven first industrial revolution. We could never have organized the first industrial revolution with an illiterate workforce. We needed print literacy. 20th century, second industrial revolution, another convergence of communication energy, centralized electricity, especially the telephone, then later radio and television. These became the communication media to manage a more dispersed automobile and oil era, a suburban era, and a mass consumer society. That second industrial revolution is on life support. We are fortunate. We are on the cusp right now of a third industrial revolution, a new convergence of communication and energy. I just don't know if we'll get there in time. But we are fortunate that we have the recipe. We've had a very powerful communication revolution in the last 25 years. The personal computer, the internet. What's so interesting about the internet as a communication medium is the way it's organized. I grew up on centralized communication, one-to-many communication, top-down. Television, radio, magazines, newspapers, book publishing. What's so interesting about the internet as a communication revolution is the way it's organized. It's not centralized, it's distributed communication. It's not top-down, it's collaborative. It isn't vertically integrated, it's peer-to-peer lateral power. Understand that, and we understand the door we need to go through in Kazakhstan to a new economic revolution for this country and the world. Distributed, collaborative, peer-to-peer, lateral power. What's interesting to me is how fast we did this. If I had said to you in 1989 that in 2013, 22 years later, a third of the human race, with cheap cell phones that they give away, would be sending audio, video, and text to each other at the speed of light, distributed, collaborative, peer-to-peer, a third of the human race sending audio, video, and text at near zero marginal cost, almost free. If I had said that to you in 1989, what would you have said? In 2013, a third of the human race is up there on the net. 1 billion kids are on Facebook. 500 million people are gossiping on Twitter. Hundreds of thousands of people in classrooms are Skyping every day. And in 2 seconds, you go up on Google and you can have the magic box connect you to the knowledge of the planet at zero, near zero marginal cost. Amazing. That's only half the story. This distributed, collaborative, peer-to-peer communication revolution is now beginning to converge with a new energy regime. Distributed energies, which are organized collaboratively and scale peer-to-peer its lateral power. It's a perfect match of communication and energy. The European Union. Let me preface this. You know, in my country, they think, oh, the European Union, it's a nice place to go and visit, but it's a museum. I try to remind my European fellow countrymen that the 27 member states of the European Union have a higher GDP than the 50 states of the United States of America today. It's the most powerful economy in the world. The European Union has made a formal commitment to a 5-pillar Third Industrial Revolution plan. I was privileged to develop this plan for and with the EU. This is our formal plan. This plan was endorsed by the European Parliament in June 2007. It's working its way through the European Commission, the member states, and I should say to you that Germany and Denmark are so far ahead of the rest of the world, it takes my breath away. Watch Germany. I've been working with the Chancellor of German Industries since the new administration came in, and what I'm about to outline to you, Germany is doing it in real time, much quicker than we thought. Pillar 1. The European Union has made a formal commitment to 20% renewable energy. It's the 20-20-20 by 2020 plan. First 20%, increase energy efficiency by 20%, Kazakhstan, by 2020. The second 20%, reduce CO2 emissions, Kazakhstan, by 2020, 20%. The third takes us to the new era, 20% renewable energy by 2020. 1/3 of the electricity in Europe has to be renewable. This isn't a suggestion, it's a mandate. Every region has to do this. So pillar 1, we're heading to renewable energies. Now, renewable energies are what we call distributed energies. Why do we call them distributed? Let me compare them to elite energies, oil, coal, shale gas, uranium, they're elite. Because most of us don't have these energies in our backyard. They're only found in a few places. They require huge military investments to secure them, huge geopolitical management to maintain them, massive capital to finance them from the wellhead to the end user. These are the most elite, centralized, costly, vertically integrated energies we have ever introduced since we've been on this planet. And they're sunsetting. What are distributed energies? Those are energies that are found in every square inch of the world. The sun shines all over this planet and all over Kazakhstan every day. 45 minutes of sunlight can power the world for a year, and 1/10 of 1% of the sun that hits the earth, if we harness it, gives us 7 times more power than our economy will ever need. It's distributed. The wind blows, especially across Kazakhstan, the wind blows across this planet every day. 20% of that wind harnessed, 6 times more power than we'll ever need. Underneath the ground, right here and around the world, is a hot geothermal core of energy, the remnants of the sun. We came from the sun. So underneath the ground, that sun is still there. It's red hot. We can take that geothermal heat up and use it everywhere in the world. In the rural areas, we have forestry waste, agricultural waste that can be overnight converted to energy. In the coastal regions, our ocean tides and waves are coming in. They're a source of energy 24 hours a day. We can take our garbage in our buildings and convert it anaerobically to energy overnight. We have enough of these distributed energies in some frequency or proportion in every inch of Kazakhstan and every inch of this world to provide for our species till the very end of history. So Pillar 1, 20% renewable energies. Pillar 2, how do we collect energies that are distributed? Our first thoughts in Europe was we'll go to Italy and Greece and Spain. They got a lot of sun. We'll build some big solar parks and put a high voltage electricity line in. And we'll ship it all to Europe. The Irish have offshore wind. We'll build some big wind parks and ship it off to Europe, etc. Let me say that none of us oppose these more concentrated uses of what are essentially distributed energies. They're easy, we like them, they're quick. But here's what we learned in Europe. We cannot manage a continental economy on a few centralized solar, wind, hydro parks. And we began to ask the question, if renewable energy is everywhere in Europe, every square inch of Europe, why would we only collect it in a few points? Old-fashioned thinking, based on fossil fuel and nuclear power, which is centralized. So Pillar 2, if renewable energies are in everywhere, where do we collect them? Everywhere. Think buildings, infrastructure. We have 191 million buildings in the European Union. Homes, offices, factories, barns, and sheds. Buildings use the most energy. They create the most CO2. By the way, does anyone here know what the number 2 cause of industrial climate change is after buildings? Number 3 is transport. Number 2 is beef production and consumption and animal husbandry, and not a single world leader, including the ones I advise in 192 countries, has made a single statement about the number 2 cause of climate change, beef production and consumption, animal husbandry, because they don't want to annoy the public who may have to slightly change our dietary habits to save our species. Even Al Gore won't talk about it. Number 1 is buildings. Our goal in Europe is to convert all 191 existing buildings to your own personal power plant. We put in energy efficiencies, we retrofit the buildings to get them sealed, and then we put the solar, the vertical wind, the heat pumps right there. So you can collect sun off the roof, wind off the side of the building, You can collect geothermal heat underneath the building, convert your garbage to energy in the building. The new buildings are positive power. Bouygues is in my group. It's one of our 120 companies. Bouygues, the great French construction company, 2 years ago, they built the first positive power building in the Paris suburbs. It's beautiful. It's an office complex. It sucks up so much sun that it provides for all of its needs, and it can send surplus energy to the grid. Now that we know how to do it, as soon as that Bouygues building came up, 25 universities have now done it. And now we have contractors who are building suburban units, prefab, positive power, cheaper than traditional construction, all in 24 months since the first building came up. Every construction industry representative in this room, we can show you the plans. You can do it tomorrow morning. We know how to do this now. Pillar 2 jumpstarts the economy. This is important for Kazakhstan because 80% of your building stock will be built between now and 2030. This is an asset because you can start from scratch and get it right. It's easier to build from scratch than to try to change an old infrastructure. This puts you ahead of the game. And Pillar 2 jumpstarts the economy. It means construction. It means lots of jobs. It means retrofitting every building and putting power on it. 30 years to convert the entire building stock of Kazakhstan to thousands of individual power plants. Let me use an analogy here. The building as power plant is analogous to the personal computer. In 1970, we had a few big companies, and they had a few computers. They were millions of dollars each computer, and it was centralized. Then Steve Jobs and a couple of kids in Silicon Valley, they invented the personal computer. Today, 1/3 of the human race, cheap cell phones, sending audio, video, and text at near zero marginal cost. Just like that. Analogy, today we have a few power and utility companies in every country. They generate fossil fuel and nuclear power, sell it to millions of us. But already in Europe, with feed-in tariffs, and Kazakhstan just created your first feed-in tariff. In Europe, our feed-in tariffs have been wildly successful. We now have millions of buildings producing a small amount of green micropower, all in less than 10 years. In 10 years from now, tens of millions of buildings in Europe, Kazakhstan, and the world are going to be producing some of their own green micropower. In 20 years from now, several hundred million existing and new buildings on this planet are going to be producing some of their own green micropower. Sun off the roof, wind off the walls, heat under the ground. How do I know this? Our economists have run the numbers. Solar and wind have been on a 20-year exponential curve, just like computer chips. You know, originally, the chairman of IBM, Mr. Watson, in the 1950s, projected that we would only need 4 computers for the world because of the cost. He didn't anticipate exponential curves in computer chips. We see the same exponential curve now in solar and wind for 20 years. We're doubling the capacity, halving the cost every 2 years. Let me explain what this means. The reason industry and government hasn't captured this yet is we're metaphorically around the 15th to the 20th day. What I mean by this is if you take $1 and you double it each day, $1, $2, $4, $8, $16, $32, $64, $128, $256, $512, doesn't look like much up until the 15th day. You get a few $1,000s. Between the 16th day of doubling and the 22nd day of doubling, the exponential curve goes straight up. And you know what happens to that $1 that you've doubled every day after 30 doublings, 30 days? Do the math. $1, $2, $4, $8. In 30 days, you have $1 billion. $1 billion. So what's happening with solar and wind, they're metaphorically around the 21st day. Some of you know Ray Kurzweil, formerly head of the MIT lab, Media Lab. He did the doubling, our group did the doubling. In 16 more years, 8 more doublings, the whole world's in solar power. I think he's a little optimistic. I would say 20 years. Just like computer chips, the personal computer, we went to near zero marginal cost in 20 to 23 years. We're on the same exact curve with solar and wind. And then here's what's interesting. Remember I said that you and I can send information at near zero marginal cost because the infrastructure's in? You have your little cell phone. You pay for your service provider. It's free. The sun off your roof is free. The wind off the side of your business is free. The geothermal heat underneath your factory is free. The garbage in your kitchen to energy is free. So just as we have in 20-some years with exponential curves in computing gone from $1 million to computers to a $25 Raspberry and near free marginal cost, we are on the exact same curve with solar and wind, and the other renewables will follow. And in 20 years from now, the harvesting technologies to capture the sun, the wind, the geothermal heat, they're going to be as cheap as cell phones. This curve is not going to end. If anything, it's going to accelerate. This is what Germany understands. And let me give the numbers. Germany is already, since the chancellors come in, have made the conversion. They're off nuclear. They're moving off fossil fuels. Germany is now almost 25% green energy right now this afternoon. They will be at 35% green energy by 2020, and they've just begun. Pillar 2, Germany has converted 1 million buildings. 1 million buildings in Germany are now producing some small amounts of micropower. And the feed-in tariff has successfully moved the technology so we can now reduce the feed-in tariffs because we're heading to parity. Near zero marginal cost energy. Pillar 3, we got to store this energy. Sun isn't always shining. You have clouds. Sometimes the wind blows at night, but we want the electricity during the day. If you have drought from climate change, your water tables are down for hydroelectricity. These are very intermittent energies. We have to store them. That's pillar 3. At the EU, we're in favor of all storage technologies. Batteries, flywheels, capacitors, water pumping, air compression. We like all of them. However, I should tell you, we put much of our focus at the center of storage on hydrogen. It's the basic element of the universe. It's what we're made out of. It stores other energies, and it's completely modular. So if you have an apartment, you can put a little hydrogen fuel cell there or in a big power complex for the country. The EU has committed 8 billion euros right now to a public deployment of hydrogen technology. E.ON, the great German utility company, is working with Hydrogenics in our group, and they're testing hydrogen storage across Germany. Here's how it works. You have a solar panel on your roof. You're generating a little bit of green electricity. If you don't need all that electricity, you can take the surplus and put it in water. Remember high school chemistry? You had the anode, the cathode. You put the electricity in the water, and the hydrogen then bubbles over to the side of the tank. It separates out of the H2O, all right? You capture it. You store it. When the sun isn't shining on your solar panel, you take that stored hydrogen that came out of the water, and in a fuel cell, you convert it back to electricity. It stores it. High school chemistry. And when people say it's not here, the storage is here. We just have to scale it. And so we're beginning to scale it. Pillar 3, we have to store this electricity. Pillar 4, this is where the internet revolution, which is distributed, collaborative, peer-to-peer, laterally scaled, converges with the new distributed energies, which are collaborative and laterally scaled. We are beginning to transform the electricity grid of Europe to an energy internet, a distributed smart grid. If someone says to you smart grid, ask them what kind. Centralized, this isn't what this is about. Distributed. So when millions and millions of buildings across Europe are generating just small amounts of green electricity, storing it in hydrogen like we store media in digital. We store media in digital, same thing. If you don't need some of that electricity, you can then program your software in your factory, office, or building to share your green electricity on an energy internet all across Europe from the Irish Sea to Russia. Just like we now create information, store it in digital, share it online. Same technology. Deutsche Telekom, they've been testing the smart grid across Germany successfully for several years now. We're ready for deployment. It's already begun in Denmark and Germany. This is not academic. Pillar 5, last pillar, transport and logistics. Electric vehicles are here. Fuel cell cars, trucks, and buses, hydrogen driven, will be out by all 6 automobile companies in 2016. This is a done deal. In mass production. We'll be able to plug in our electric and fuel cell vehicles anywhere where there's green infrastructure and get electricity and hydrogen. And then across Europe, every parking space will have a plug to the grid. Plug into the grid when you park your car or truck, get green electricity, or your computer will monitor in your car the price of electricity, and if the price goes up, your software can be programmed so you sell some of your electricity stored in your car back to the grid. We already are doing this in Europe. There are now places we are doing this on the street. These 5 pillars, renewable energy, distributed. Convert every building to your own micro power plant, pillar 2. Pillar 3, put in storage to store these intermittent energies. Pillar 4, set up an energy internet to share these energies across a continent. Pillar 5, plug in your transport, electric mobility, electric cars, and hydrogen. Here's what I would like to say to you, because you're about to embark on a great journey in Kazakhstan, and you're going to lead Central Asia and the developing world into this 3rd industrial revolution. So let me say this to you. These 5 pillars are just components. It's only when we connect them that we create the synergies for what we call an intelligent infrastructure. Do not make the mistake President Obama made. We have all the ministries here. Do not make the mistake we made. I voted for President Obama. I like the president. He wanted a green economy. He spent billions of dollars of tax money on the stimulus program for a green economy. No green economy. What happened? The mistake Washington made is they dedicated billions of dollars to isolated, standalone pilot projects. So they'd invest in a solar factory in one state or an electric car factory in another state, unconnected. What we didn't understand is the great economic revolutions are infrastructure revolutions. You bring communication together with energy and build out an infrastructure. The 2nd industrial revolution, it wasn't enough to have the internal combustion engine. We then needed centralized electricity so that Henry Ford could have electric power tools to bring the work to the workers and create a cheap car. But then we had to have the road system in to run the cars on. But then we had to have the gasoline and oil pipelines in at the same time for fuel. But then we had to have the telephone connected to rural areas so we could build suburbs and communicate across national markets. It's a package. This is power to the people. I mean this figuratively and literally. This 3rd industrial revolution is power to the people. Envision what's happened in 20 years now that 1/3 of the human race can communicate with each other, peer-to-peer, distributed. It's changed the world. It's democratized our ability to communicate with each other with huge consequences. But now envision 20 years from now when several billion human beings are going to be producing their own green electricity here in Kazakhstan and around the world at near 0 marginal cost. We're democratizing energy with the internet helping to manage it. That's the revolution. I'm going to share with you for a few minutes the mistakes we made in Europe. We have the whole 5 pillars, we have the plan, but we moved pillar 1 too quickly relating to the other 4 pillars. So you and I, Minister Kaparov, have talked about this. We were vastly successful in getting renewable energy moving in Europe, pillar 1. The problem is we didn't move pillar 4 quick enough, the energy internet. So we have this old electricity grid that's servo-mechanical, centralized, only goes in one direction, it's dumb, and it leaks 20% of its electricity. So now we've got millions and millions of little players who are generating green electricity from the feed-in tariffs, and the old transmission grid can't handle millions of little players sending their green electricity to the grid. They have no way to do it, so it's a big mess. Then pillar 1 has been so successful, we have regions of Europe that are 30, 40, 50, 60% green electricity. Navarra, Spain, and Aragon, Spain, are 70% green electricity. But we didn't move pillar 3 quick enough, storage. So we have all this green electricity generating in Europe. We're losing 3 out of 4 kilowatts because we haven't stored it. And then our car companies are petrified. Nissan, Renault is in my group, Daimler. They're spending billions for the build-out of the electric and fuel cell vehicles, but if the rest of the infrastructure is not there, they're orphaned. You got to build it all out. It's an infrastructure revolution. This is what they understand in China. There's a huge discussion. My book was published there last June. I think there's like 400,000 copies in print. You may know this. Premier Li last December, the new premier, said he read the book. It was put out publicly by the Chinese news agency, and he said that he's recommending his government agencies immediately begin the task of figuring out how China moves on this. I just met 2 weeks ago with the Vice Premier Wang Yang, the economy minister, who's endorsed the book, the plan, and there's a debate across China on how to move these 5 pillars really quickly. And remember, as we talk later, Kazakhstan is the pivotal country, the old Silk Road, the pivotal country in Central Asia, and you border China, Russia, and an entryway between Europe and China. We will talk about what advantages this